Have you ever wondered if you might actually be invisible? Thought about this. I was listening to a song, one of my favorites, very popular in the 90s, Melissa Etheridge, listening to a song by her, one that I've loved for a long time. And as usual with Melissa's songs, it was just filled with emotion. It's just evocative of longing and love and hope. Melissa speaks in this song of spending time with the one that she loves, and they seem to live in some unidentified, dingy, unimportant little city out in the middle of nowhere. And they don't matter to anyone, the two of them. And they drive around this town, and nobody notices them at all. And she suddenly seems seized by this sense of being invisible. And so she sings. And what she sings is this: there's no one to hear. You might as well scream. They never woke up from the American dream. And they don't understand what they don't see. And they look through you, and they look past me. Oh, you and I, dancing slow. We've got nowhere to go. And she sings this song with such deep longing for her love and her satisfaction on being together with the one that she has, and mixed with the knowledge that these moments of love that the two of them have together are about the only satisfaction that they're going to find in a world that just disregards them as people. At this moment, they don't feel hated and they don't feel persecuted, although that certainly has been the case for them. At least not at this moment, they're not feeling that. They just know that others don't care for them or care about them. They are too far out on the edge of society. They're just too much different, and the mainstream of people just passes them by and pushes them further and further out to the edge. Melissa's story is the story of the poor person, the immigrant, the disabled person. It's the story of the minority. It's the story of the nonconformists who are standing in the square with their tattoos and holding skateboards and looking different than everybody else. It's the story of the student who just wants to understand but finds that the teacher doesn't care enough to be reached. It's the story of the unemployed person who has to stand in line and be embarrassed by having to ask for a handout, only to come up against some bureaucrat who just doesn't care about their situation, and who themselves are stuck in a job that they hate. And nobody cares if they do a good job or not. This is the story of that kid who always got picked last for kickball. Was that you? It's the story of people who sit quietly in their pews in church while the active, glib, clever people talk about their spiritual journeys and tell about the latest work of their committee. It's the people who wonder how others seem to always have all the gifts and advantages. It's the story of the veteran who sits and sees the battlefield still and is unable to talk about it. It's the story of the gay couple whose relationship isn't accepted. It's the story of the person whose body aches with arthritis and aches much deeper with loneliness, staring at a nursing home television that is telling stories about all the important people in the world and all the beautiful, wonderful things that they will never have. In short, Melissa's story is the story of the outcast who lives a life unseen by the busy, rushing crowd that hurries past their outstretched hands, or their art, or their songs, or their dances, or their struggles. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure some of you do. I can tell you about this from my own personal perspective. I have never gone to a reunion of any of my schools from the past. I suppose there are a variety of reasons, some of which is that some of them are just far away, but this one is for one I am pretty sure that at least from high school on down, there isn't a single person in my school who would remember me. I was an invisible child. There was very little to notice about me. I didn't get into much trouble, and I never did anything serious. In junior high, I got into trouble for this. One morning I was leaning against the wall waiting for the school to open, a cold morning. And I was standing there. As I was standing there, I realized that I had forgotten my lunch at home. And I kicked back against the door like that out of frustration. Oh, I forgot my lunch. And I kicked that just as a teacher passed by whose name, and I'm not kidding, was Mrs. Fardette, who had to teach junior high school. Mrs. Fardette walked past me just as I kicked the door, and she hauled me into the office where I was ordered to stay in detention and write a paper about what I had done. Never ask me to tell you what I think if you don't want to know. So I did it. I wrote about how it felt to get up on a cold, dark Baltimore morning and deliver the Baltimore sun in my neighborhood, and then, still tired, get dressed and make breakfast, cold cereal usually, and then try to walk to school without getting picked on by the bullies that were always in wait for me, or getting laughed at by the popular girls that wouldn't have anything to do with me. And then realize I was somehow going to have to get lunch by borrowing money or calling home, and it was cold and I was tired, and I kicked the door, and Mrs. Fardette was not only unsympathetic, she was furious, and I got a week's detention for that, which I ignored and which she forgot about. And I passed her in the hallways, and I often wondered, but she never ever seemed to remember that she had given me a week's detention. So there I was, a kid without much behavior trouble who never got good grades and never flunked, and no one cared or noticed, and I was invisible. And also, it was sad that poor Miss Fardette, who was grumpy and unhappy all the time, so caught up in her own pain that she took it out on a little boy who had no friends and who was only noticed by the mean kids. And that's a sad story. In the song that I've started with, Melissa says that most people were too busy pursuing the American dream to see them. They were busy trying to make it, trying to prove that their own worth to the world around them. But Melissa discovered that there was a greater value if you could just find someone to love. It wasn't the praise of the world that mattered. It was the intimacy of dancing slow with the one she loved. This moment, she says, is divine. I'm so close to heaven, and this hell is not mine. And I know that there are people who seem to have found some piece of heaven while living on the outside of society. I know that there are people on the margins who are sometimes able to find each other. And when they do, life becomes better. It makes such a difference to think that there is someone out there to whom you matter. It matters to matter. Now, this might be one of those sermons that's a little hard to get a handle on. You might be asking yourself, what am I talking about? Or if someone says, how was it? You might say, well, I'm not really sure. I think it was good, but I'm not sure what he was saying. So let me make it clear. This is not going to go the way I usually go, which would be to challenge you to see the invisible ones around you. That would be a challenge, and I've done enough of that. I want to reach out to those of you who are the ones that are hurting today, especially to those of you who are trying to get through life with a little bit of your dignity still intact. And I want to say something to those of you who are invisible, who feel as if they don't have any value to anyone else, to those who wonder if they matter. The Christian faith has something to say to you, because you who are dancing around the edges, wondering if you ever belong, well, we are followers of the one who had the vision to see those people out on the edges. And if we believe in Jesus Christ, we see God as God is. And then we can say, if that's who God is, then God cares and sees you. Jesus lived a life defined by compassion. He looked out at the people on the margins and the edges, and he called them in to be close to them. He brought healing to people of all kinds. He healed bodies, and he healed minds, and he healed souls. The Bible stories often talk about the demons that Jesus cast out of people, threw away, demons with names that we all know, demons with names like self-loathing, and unimportance and loneliness or poverty or addiction or illness or society or prejudice or doubt. We are people who believe that God throws those demons out. Jesus saw these people who struggled with this. He saw the weak, he saw the poor, the sick, he saw those who were slowly dancing on the edges of life, and he called to them. He called to Matthew, who was sitting there in that tax collector's booth doing a job that he knew he shouldn't even be doing, and Jesus called to him. He called out to Peter and Andrew and James and John, just poor fishermen out there on the Lake Galilee, and called them to come and do something important with him. He saw that young woman who, that young and desperate woman, and she begged him for forgiveness, and he saw her. He saw the old sick woman who just reached out just to touch the edge of his robe. He saw the man who was so crippled he couldn't move. He saw the blind man who could only call out for help because he'd been abandoned by his family. He saw the lepers. He saw the mentally ill. He saw the tormented. He saw the dangerous schizophrenics who lived in the cemetery on that edge of town and hurt themselves and hurt others. He saw the old scholar and religious leader who was tormented by his questions and doubts. He saw the ordinary people, just the ordinary people, who got up and made breakfast and went to work and went home and went to bed at the end of the day, happy to have just a little bit of their own. These are the people that Jesus saw. And he went to them and he touched them with grace and with love. And he looked them in the eye. He talked to them. He asked them who they were and what was on their minds. He saw them. He didn't look through them. And he loved these people, the fishermen, the prostitutes, the shopkeepers, the beggars. He loved them. He looked at them, and he thought they were beautiful. And he wasn't here on earth to get rich or to get famous or to grab power. He wasn't here to give that to anybody else. He didn't promise wealth or power to anyone. He didn't have a secret plan for playing the stock market. He didn't hand out 7 secrets of success. He didn't start a new political party. But he saw, and he told them all that they had value, that they might be invisible to the towns they live in, but they weren't invisible to God, and you aren't either. In those moments of slow dancing, sitting by the water, or finding a quiet place on a hillside, God danced with them. Does Jesus walk the streets of this community today? Does he see people? If he does, who does he see? He sees young folks, for sure. He sees them with their green hair and their tattoos. He sees the young ones who are trying to be seen with their outlandish clothing and yet become even more visible when they do. Jesus sees them. He sees the immigrants, the people that came here from terrible situations and come here to this country to try to create a new life in a world where they don't know anything, not even the language. He sees those people as they struggle to become one here in this community. He sees the young ones who are in love and smiles when they find each other. For a while at least, they know the lovely joy of dancing slow with someone who sees you. He sees the students in the schools, especially the ones who get no honors, who don't make the team, who don't get asked to the prom. Jesus is especially aware of the child that sits alone in the cafeteria. And is that you? Jesus sees the worker in the cubicle, the one who is unnoticed by co-workers and bosses, who just go about their work and never get anywhere. Jesus sees the waitress, the teacher, the assembly line worker, the salesman, the cashier, the guy holding the slow and stop sign at the edge of the construction site, and he sees the people that are waiting in traffic for that guy with the sign that says slow and stop, hoping that when the guy turns the sign to slow, that piece of junk that they're driving will actually start up again and go through that. He sees all of that. He sees the people waiting in line at DHHS to find out what's going to happen to their families and their homes. He sees the ordinary people in the ordinary houses. He sees the elderly in their nursing homes, the babies in their daycare centers, the people caught in between who worry about both their elders and their babies. Jesus sees you, even if you are one of the invisible ones, even if you are one that everyone looks past, goes unnoticed. Jesus sees you, looks at you, touches you, smiles at you. Jesus sees who you are, knows what's in your heart for good or bad. Jesus sees those quiet moments of lonely despair and those wonderful moments of love and belonging. Jesus sees you as you are and loves you. You are not unnoticed. You are seen and you are known. Maybe the people who claim Jesus' name don't see you. Maybe they do. Don't let that bother you. Jesus sees you and welcomes you, no matter how invisible you may be. And when Jesus sees you, Jesus smiles. Amen.
You've been listening to a sermon by Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, you're invited to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, starting at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to Steve's sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC, where you'll find the video version of Steve's sermons as well. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day. May God's blessings rest upon you now and always. See you next week.